Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're taking a look at a range of new Intel Z790 motherboards designed to take advantage of the new 14th generation core series, which, as I'm sure by now you probably know, is just 13th gen renamed. Anyway, if you're on the market for a new system or platform upgrade and you've decided to go with Intel's LGA 1700 platform, these new Z790 motherboards might be worth being aware of. But before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Ugreen and their new Nexode 100-watt MagSafe charger. This compact, premium desktop charger provides an array of charging options, with 15-watt wireless charging provided on the top of the device, 3 USB ports, and an impressive 100-watt output from a single USB Type-C port. The 100-watt MagSafe charger also features GaN technology, which prevents battery degradation with effective temperature management. Then for those of you on the go, Ugreen's 25,000 mAh 145-watt power bank has enough power to fully charge your smartphone 6 times with support for fast laptop charging and includes a smart digital display. Ugreen's bidirectional charging technology allows the power bank to be fast charged to 100% within 2 hours by using a 65-watt PD charger while also fast charging connected devices. These Ugreen products are compatible with a huge range of devices, so for more information and excellent Black Friday deals for up to 50% off, please check the links in the video description. Okay, so we've got 11 boards in total from the likes of Asus, Asrock, MSI, and Gigabyte, ranging from $280 all the way up to $1,200. So let's check out each board individually, see what features they have to offer, and then we'll take a look at some VRM thermal testing. It's kind of crazy to me that Z790 needed a refresh, given there were already more DDR4 and DDR5 Z790 motherboards than, well, even I could keep track of. Take the Asus Tough Gaming series, for example, which already had 3 ATX models. And we're only talking about a sub-brand here. Asus also offers Z790 motherboards under their ROG Prime and ProArt series. Anyway, we already had the Tough Gaming Z790 Plus D4, which was available with and without Wi-Fi. And then there was the DDR5 version, the Tough Gaming Z790 Plus Wi-Fi. Now added to the mix is the new flagship, the Tough Gaming Z790 Pro Wi-Fi. The board does look remarkably similar to the Plus, both pack the same 16 60-amp power stage V-Core VRM, and many of the same features, with the only real change here being that one of the PCIe 4.0 x1 slots has been converted to a x16 slot, but it's still only wired for x1 bandwidth. Oh, and the front USB 20 gigabits per second port now supports 30-watt PD fast charging. And that's it. I guess that's fine though. The Tough Gaming Plus was already a good board, but the issue right now is the price. As it stands, the Plus can be had for $205 US, with the more expensive in-stock listings up around $230 US. Meanwhile, all listings for the new Pro model are at $280 US, making it at least 22% more expensive, and therefore you should avoid it until the Pro and Plus pricing is much more similar. Next up, we have the Asus ROG Strix Z790-A Gaming Wi-Fi 2, coming in at $360, which is the same price as the original model, so that's good. Now, stuff like power delivery, that remains the same, with 16 70-amp power stages making up the V-Core side of the VRM, and really even the cooling is much the same, so most of the changes here are purely aesthetic. The noteworthy changes here include support for Wi-Fi 7 with Asus's new Q antenna feature, which is pretty simple really. Now you can just push the Wi-Fi antenna connections in. You don't have to screw them in. It's a nice touch, but for something that you're probably only ever going to do once, seems a little bit unnecessary. Now, one of the PCIe 4.0 x16 slots has been removed and replaced with an additional PCIe 4.0 M.2 slot. And then around at the I/O panel, there's an additional 2 USB 2.0 ports, which is nice, but the audio has been downgraded with just 2 rear jacks, resulting in ROG Supreme FX 5.1 support, whereas the original had 7.1 support. Other than that though, the boards are much the same in terms of features. Still, this second version, it's a nice little upgrade at the same price point, and it ensures 14th generation support out of the box. Certainly one of the coolest looking high-end motherboards that I've laid eyes on is the new Asus ROG Maximus Z790 Dark Hero, And as the name suggests, this is a revision of the original Hero model, and like a lot of these refreshed Asus boards, the bulk of the changes are aesthetic, which is a bit disappointing to learn, but there are at least a few noteworthy upgrades on offer here, though none of them justify the price increase. Speaking of which, the Dark Hero, it costs $700 US, while the original version can currently be had for $530 US. So what does the new model offer for that 32% price premium? Well, apart from the aesthetic changes, you get Wi-Fi 7. So I suppose that's cool. Faster wireless speeds for all those Wi-Fi 7 devices you definitely don't have. And that feature includes the upgrade from Bluetooth version 5.3 to 5.4, and that's the same across all of these Wi-Fi 7 models. The M.2 configuration though has changed, though it is hard to say if it's an upgrade. The original Hero relied on a PCI expansion card for an additional 2 M.2 slots, one of them being PCIe 5.0 and the other 4.0, with 3 more 4.0 M.2s on board, giving the board 5 in total. So 3 on the board and 2 via an expansion card. The Dark Hero though does away with the expansion card and now includes all 5 M.2s on board, and the primary 5.0 M.2 is found above the primary PCIe x16 slot. You still get 2 PCIe 5.0 x 16 slots though with the Dark Hero, so it's a slightly better configured board in my opinion. It does drop 2 of the 6 SATA ports, but that's probably going to be a non-issue for most of you. Other than that though, it includes the same 2.5 gigabit LAN, same USB configuration, same ROG Supreme FX 7.1 sound using the Realtek ALC 4082 codec, same back panel I/O configuration and the same VRM configuration using 20 90-amp power stages for the V-Core. Overall, it is a great looking board with a strong feature set, but I think the original model at $530 is a much better buy right now, so probably just get that. Moving on to check out the new MSI Z790 boards, we'll start with the Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi, an upgraded version of the popular Tomahawk board, which currently sells for $205 US for the DDR5 version. The new Max version can be currently found on sale for $240 US, though it's more typically found at $300 US, which is a massive premium over the original. Both boards physically look the same, with the exception of the yellow highlights that have been added to the new Max version. Thankfully though, MSI hasn't just added a dash of colour to the Max and called it a day. There are some physical changes here, though most of them are quite subtle. For example, the primary M.2 slot has been upgraded to support PCIe 5.0 from the CPU, whereas the previous model was limited to 4.0. That said, if you do install an SSD in the primary M.2, it will reduce the bandwidth to the primary PCIe x16 slot to x8. Moving on to stuff like USB support and wired networking, all of that remains the same, as does the onboard audio. But of course, like we've seen with many of these refreshed boards, you are getting Wi-Fi 7 with Bluetooth 5.4. Other than that though, they're the same thing. So if you don't require Wi-Fi 7 out of the box, then paying a premium for this new Max model, it certainly won't be worth it over the original. Next from MSI, we have the Z790 Edge Ti Max Wi-Fi. So they've squeezed a Ti Max in there just to make it a little bit more complicated. Now, the original model can still be had for $300 US, while the new Ti Max costs $390, which is another big premium for this refreshed model. Again, both models do look very similar, though this time it's the newer version that's a little more sedate, doing away with the orange highlights of the original. Also, once again, the I/O panels are identical, so no changes there. Rather, the changes can once again be seen when looking at the M.2 and Wi-Fi support. The primary M.2 has been upgraded from PCIe 4.0 to 5.0, but there are still 5 M.2s in total. Then the Wi-Fi solution, that's of course been upgraded from 6E to 7, but other than that, everything else remains much the same, if not exactly the same. MSI has also updated the Ace, and it's worth noting that the original version can be currently had for $500 US, making this updated Max version a pretty difficult pill to swallow at $700 US. Physically, I think they look identical, with the exception of the Max branding on the newer, more expensive model. As far as I can tell, the only update on offer here is Wi-Fi 7, but other than that, the Max is pretty much the same as the original. Oh, and the only other change, of course, includes support for 14th gen processors out of the box, and MSI is claiming some slight tweaks to memory performance. That being the case, unless you require Wi-Fi 7 out of the box, saving $200 on the original would be the way to go, and is certainly my recommendation. And it looks to be a similar story with the Godlike Max, which currently costs $1,200 US, though that is the same asking price as the original. The Godlike is obviously an insane overkill motherboard, and there's really no way to improve it right now, other than to include Wi-Fi 7 of course, so obviously MSI has done exactly that with this Max revision. Everything else though remains the same, and that means you get onboard Thunderbolt support for transfer speeds up to 40 gigabits per second, 7 M.2 slots, 10 gigabit LAN with 2.5 gigabit LAN as a backup, 7.1 channel audio, loads of USB ports on the I/O panel, and a boatload of other features. Okay, so moving on to the new Asrock Z790 motherboards, we find the Phantom Gaming Z790 Riptide Wi-Fi at $250 US, which is a reasonable premium over the $190 Z790 PG Riptide. As you'd expect, the Wi-Fi model gets Wi-Fi 7, but there are some other noteworthy upgrades on offer here. The VRM, for example, has been substantially overhauled with 16 90-amp power stages for the V-Core, and that's a massive improvement over the 14 50-amp power stages that were used previously, so a really nice upgrade there. They've also ditched the Realtek ALC897 codec for the higher-end ALC1220 codec. There's a few other nice touches as well. The cooler for the primary M.2 slot is now toolless, and all M.2s do feature a heatsink. It is a better looking board for sure, and I think the $6 US premium is justified here, so good job Asrock. Asrock's also released a new flagship Z790 Phantom gaming motherboard known as the Nova Wi-Fi for $280 US. It offers quite a lot. For just $30 more than the Riptide Wi-Fi, you're getting a more robust 20 90-amp power stage V-Core VRM, which is overkill for sure, but a nice upgrade all the same. You're also getting a larger 256 megabyte BIOS, which allows for a better graphical user interface. The audio has been upgraded to the Realtek ALC4082 codec, and there's an additional PCIe 4.0 enabled M.2 slot, though 4 SATA ports have been sacrificed. USB support has also been upgraded from a total of 16 ports to 19, with twice as many USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports. Overall, the Nova is a great looking board and a strong sub $300 US contender. Lastly, we have the Gigabyte board, and we'll start with the Z790 Aorus Elite X Wi-Fi 7, which, you guessed it, it's a Wi-Fi 7 enabled version of the original Aorus Elite AX. Now, the AX model costs $240 US, while the new Wi-Fi 7 version costs $280 US. So a reasonably small $40 premium there, but all you're getting is the upgraded Wi-Fi, well, that and support for 14th generation CPUs out of the box without having to first update the BIOS, which is really just a minor inconvenience. But other than that, it is the same board. Then we have the $530 US Aorus Master X, which is a really expensive board given that the standard Z790 Aorus Master can currently be had for $390 US. And both boards look very similar and pack many of the same features. For example, both use the Realtek ALC1220 VB audio, a Marvel 10 gigabit LAN controller, 3 PCI expansion slots, 5 M.2 slots with the same arrangement, the exact same USB configuration, and the same 20 105 amp power stage V-Core. So other than the inclusion of Wi-Fi 7 over 6E, we're just looking at some very minor cosmetic changes to the board's heatsinks, so I doubt that's worth paying a 36% premium for. Okay, so first, let's talk about the test conditions. For testing, I've built a dedicated system inside the Corsair iQ 7000X case, and powering it we have the HX1000 power supply, and for cooling the Corsair iQ H170i Elite Capelix. The iQ 7000X has been configured with a single rear 140mm exhaust fan and 3 140mm intake fans, so we're using the stock configuration for this case. Then installed in the top of the case is the H170i 420mm radiator with 3 140mm exhaust fans. This is a pretty high-end configuration, airflow is good, and in a 21-degree room, I'd say this is an optimal setup. For recording temperatures, I'm using a digital thermometer with K-type thermocouples, and I'll be reporting the peak rear PCB temperature. Finally, I'm not reporting delta T over ambient, instead I maintain a room temperature of 21 degrees, and to ensure a constant ambient temperature, a thermocouple is positioned next to the test system. As for the stress test, I'll be using Cinebench R32, which has been looped for an hour, at which point I'm reporting the maximum PCB temperature, again recorded using K-type thermocouples. Okay, so here's how each board performs out of the box using the default power profiles with XMP loaded. Right away, you'll notice a glaring issue with the models marked as limited with the orange bars. These models, namely Asus and Gigabyte boards, though there is an Asrock model in there as well, all limit the power of the Core i9-14900K for extended workloads. Most of these boards have no limit for what Intel calls PL1, a temporary power state. After a certain time period, around about a minute typically, the PL2 state kicks in, which is a reduced power state. The Asus and Asrock boards revert to a 253 watt power limit, while the Gigabyte boards are limited to 280 watts. MSI, on the other hand, they have no power limit for PL1 or PL2, and Asrock's decided to do the same with their Nova board, but not the Riptide. So as usual, the Intel platform is a bit of a mess when it comes to power configurations, and this is something that we've been advocating Intel fix for years now. The primary issue with this being all-core performance, especially for extended workloads, which can vary quite substantially depending on the board used, assuming you don't go and manually adjust the power parameters. For example, in our hour-long Cinebench test, the Asus and Asrock boards saw an average clock frequency of 3.75 GHz on the P cores, whereas the MSI boards sustained a clock frequency that was almost 50% higher at 5.52 GHz, which is an insane difference. Therefore, the VRM temperatures you see here very much make for an apples to oranges comparison. So let's remove the PL2 power limit and retest. Okay, so now the 14900K is clocking between 5.4 and 5.6 GHz, depending on the board. So still some variance there, but now we're only talking about a 4% variance and not over 40%. And what we're ideally looking for here is temperatures to be below 100 degrees. And to ensure reasonable operating temperatures under all conditions, sub 80 degree temperatures here are ideal. For our testing, we maintain an ambient room temperature of just 21 degrees, and we test inside a well-ventilated ATX case, but with the doors closed, of course. The good news is no boards failed our test, and all were acceptable, though some certainly did perform better than others. The Gigabyte models, for example, were the best, followed by the Asus Dark Hero and MSI Godlike. The MSI Ace ran surprisingly warm at 80 degrees, while the Tomahawk Max and Edge TI Max were surprisingly warm at 82 degrees and 86 degrees respectively, though they did also achieve some of the highest average clock speeds. Now, with all boards locked at 1.3 volts for the V-core and 5.3 GHz for the P-cores, and we did this while externally monitoring power usage, these are the most apples-to-apples results we have. The MSI Ace is performing much more like the Godlike now, while the Asus Tough Gaming has fallen down the order. The Gigabyte boards are still the coolest, though the Asrock models are now ranking much better. Overall though, acceptable results across the board, with no VRM issues with any of these Z790 models. So there you have it. If you're in the market for a new Z790 motherboard, any of these models will work well. Just buy according to your budget and then pick the model that offers the best features or the features that suit your needs for that particular budget. That said, it is well worth checking out the original versions of the boards that have an original version. But yeah, it's worth checking out the original version because in many instances they are much cheaper while offering many of the same features. And in all instances, the VRM is the same, so VRM thermals are going to be the same. It's possible that these pricing discrepancies will go away over time, but as it stands right now, many of these refreshed Wi-Fi 7 enabled boards, they just don't make sense in terms of value. Unfortunately, I didn't get time to do a big Z790 roundup when all of these boards first came out. Not these refresh boards, but I mean the original Z790 motherboards. And instead at the time, I did prioritize covering the new X670 and B650 motherboards from AMD, as more of you were interested in the AM5 platform, and with future support on the table, it just made more sense to invest our time testing, as that content will be useful for years to come. Anyway, there probably isn't too much point making any recommendations here, as it really comes down to pricing in your region, and I expect that Z790 pricing is going to move around quite a lot in the coming months, possibly invalidating any recommendations that I make now. The good news is there's really no bad boards here that you should avoid, so simply compare the features of the models in your target price range and just go from there. And that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do, all the YouTube stuff, and if you'd like to become a Hardware Unboxed community member, we have Float Plan or Patreon, links are at the top of the video description for those, or just under the advertiser links. And yeah, signing up to either of those gives you more Hardware Unboxed goodness, access to our exclusive Discord server for members only, monthly Q&A where Tim and I get together and talk about what's going on. We answer your questions live, do all that sort of stuff. There's behind the scenes content, Q&A stuff, a lot of cool things there, so check it out if you're interested, but if not, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.